Welcome to Podcetera. Each episode is a journey of discovery as we delve into topics that pique our curiosity and yours. We feature in-depth interviews with fascinating individuals who have extraordinary stories to share.
I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. And this
is Podcetera. Damir, welcome to Podcetera. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Your journey in music seems to have started at a young age. Can you share some of your earliest memories with music that ignited your passion?
My dad was a passionate musician. I grew up in what used to be Yugoslavia. It was a socialist country. This is 60s and 70s, Eastern Europe, right? This is during Cold War. Comparing to how things were in the United States, there was not many or as many material things. It was not oppressed in any way. I never felt oppressed as a child growing up there. It was a great place to grow up. Living here in the States for the last, 30, 35 years, I compare things at a time and look at kids, how they are growing up, including my own kids, these days growing up with phones and all these kind of things. And I look back at how we were growing up. We played with each other, as I'm sure you guys did, as kids in person without any gadgets. And music was a big part of the fun. And my dad happened to be a saxophone player, a tenor saxophone player. He played beautifully. And my uncle played piano, played accordion as well. And whenever my cousins would come over for families to hang out, inevitably, the sax would come out and the piano would get set behind and they would just play music. And, the apartment that I grew up in was in this kind of a socialist unit building, right? I remember looking a few times after my dad and my uncle would start playing and all the neighbors would come outside. They would bring blankets and picnic stuff and they would just sit and listen to them play and enjoy themselves. And I imagine that had a pretty profound impact on my experience and impression of music. Just seeing the power and the connection with people and just seeing people in a good mood. It's very beautiful.
Was your dad a traditional Bosnian music player or did he play current music as well?
This is the 60s for him. That was kind of probably late 50s and early 60s was his time being a saxophone player. He was very much into jazz and what they're calling here kind of the American standards from your Nat King Cole and Ella Fitzgerald and all the real book music that is standard these days, the jazz standards from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and 60s. That was his passion. Glenn Miller. All that stuff. He also did enjoy, and I did too, some of the ethnic folk music from the history of the region, which to me is very different from kind of the modern folk, turbo folk they call it these days, music that's based on this ethnic music but has nothing to do with it. And I just despise it. I couldn't run far away from it. So it's kind of music that's based on these kind of ethnic traditional influences. These days they'll add four on the floor kind of a disco rhythm and modern production, and they can be produced really well. Not political, but just I guess cultural in that way. It's just everything is about, oh, why did you leave me? And I love you so much. And it's just cheap and crass. And, there's a lot of drinking of Slivovitsa, the plum brandy from over there and that kind of stuff. And that's just not my thing. Perhaps in some ways, the difference between your traditional Western American music, cowboy songs that might have been sang around the campfire that have been around, Oh My Darling Clementine or whatever. I'm just pulling it out of my back of my brain, comparing to the modern country music these days, which is produced and there's millions behind it. And it's just very different. I know a lot of people like it, so you don't discuss people's taste. It's just not my thing. I play piano. I grew up playing piano. For quite some time, I stopped practicing piano. I was basically playing the computer. through my work and through everything that I was doing, right? So electronic keyboards that were connected to a computer, and there was like the interface, so I could input the music in there. But during pandemic, when life stopped, I reconnected with the piano, and I really enjoyed it, like to a whole different level, where now as an adult, the process of practicing the piano, especially during that time, was meditative. It would put me at ease. It was beautiful, right? I've been telling young persons that, just kind of sharing my experience of all the kids, starting with my kids, my son and my daughter, and all the kids that I know that are playing an instrument, to kind of understand, I do understand the impatience of a young mind and body to sit for a long time behind an instrument and repeat the same thing over and over again. There's just no patience for it. As an adult, you start getting into it. It's just beautiful and really rewarding. And I try now to play at least for a bit during the day, and I definitely play before I go to sleep. That's my last thing for the day. Before I brush my teeth, I sit at the piano and I play for myself, not for anybody else. For my kids if they're around, and it's just crown on the day in my world.
That's awesome that you rediscovered it. I've played flute until probably I was 18, and then that was the end of that. My mother said, "You're playing this instrument?" But I have to say I'm grateful, because I think it really helped me formulate a love of a lot of different kinds of music.
I've been thinking about all of that because your story is similar to so many people's stories. Right? Most force their kids to learn the piano. And even though I was the one asking to play an instrument, at a certain point, I lost interest. I was maybe 13, 14, wanted to go, play soccer and run around and play with the other kids. My mom was pretty good at this, and she was a teacher, and she would make me stay and practice. And I was unhappy about that for a while, and now I'm so grateful. But one thing I can tell you is it's never too late. It really is too late. My sister actually plays piano as well. She teaches in Athens, Georgia, and many of her students are in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and they're having a blast.
Learning piano is definitely on my bucket list.
I recently picked up drums again. This conversation resonates with me, what you're talking about. I started when I was 8. I didn't have the patience for it, and I picked it up about 6 years ago. So I have a whole different perspective now in learning an instrument.
Beautiful. We get wiser as we get a little older, and that's part of it. And you reflected things you wish you did when you were younger. And again, it really isn't too late. And now we have the means and the power to arrange our lives so they run the way we want. You can manage your time, you can make choices. I choose not to watch television for an hour. I'm going to sit and learn how to play an instrument. If it makes you feel good. If it doesn't, then fine. But it's really rewarding. It's incredibly rewarding. Just small little steps forward can be just beautiful.
Can you detail a little bit your journey from Bosnia to Los Angeles, and when did you move to the United States?
I think it was late spring of 1984. I was about to go into senior year in high school, and the teacher that was in charge of the class I was in came to us and said, "We want you to pick 2 of you that will go and spend a year living in the United States of America as exchange students." And they picked myself and one more guy. And my parents agreed to it reluctantly. And next thing you know, I was flying to, it wasn't Ellis Island, but it was an island in New York, somewhere in New York. I didn't even know where it was, where we had some sort of orientation for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks with hundreds of kids from around the world. It was the AFS, American Field Service, which I think started during World War II. They set up these exchanges and cultural exchanges. And then I flew to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I spent a year living there in a beautiful family that I'm still friends with and still in touch with, that changed my life tremendously. Graduated the high school. At the end of the high school, college recruiters would come in and talk about schools. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And one guy came in and talked about a school in Boston where you can get a college degree studying modern music. Since 1984, I came in clean cut. I was actually I don't know how much time we have, but they kind of introduced me into the Communist Party of Yugoslavia just before I left. So that was like the extra angle to things, right? So I come to the States and, I become friends in, like the opposite of any of that, right? Fell in love with the music, with The Cure, Depeche Mode, Dead Can Dance, all of that stuff. I went to see U2 at Red Rocks in 1984. It's just, this is what I want to do. And so this guy is, hey, you can go and you can get a college degree learning how to do this. I applied, and funnily enough, I got accepted, but I got my acceptance letter when I was back in Yugoslavia, in Montenegro, giving my oath to Yugoslav army and to Tito and whatever, because you have to serve the military service. It was mandatory, the way I think still is in maybe Israel.
Is it 1 year or more?
15 months, 1 year and 3 months. Yeah. So within like literally 3 weeks after landing from the States, being all cool and, hanging out, my head is shaved. I'm sleeping with MK-47, learning how to kill people and all that stuff. And I did that for 15 months. Again, I was accepted, but there was just no way for my parents to afford paying for the college because it's a private school. It's Berklee College of Music in Boston. I couldn't give up. After I served the military, I spent a year studying in Sarajevo. And then the host family from Colorado Springs got in touch with me and said, listen, we know you want to go to Berklee. We think you might have a better chance of getting there if you're in the States. And we just hosted kids from a group called Up With People. And we told them about you. And even though most people have to pay to travel with them, they are willing to take you on because you play keyboards and you're from a kind of exotic place in Eastern Europe. They'll cover all the expenses for you. And next thing you know, I'm flying back to the States, to Tucson, Arizona for a month to learn about the show. They put me in charge of all the keyboards. I was in heaven, They had a decent budget and I had the top of the line electronic instruments at my disposal to learn how to use for the show and have fun with. And I traveled for a year with a cast of 120 kids from a lot of countries around the world, staying in host families during all this time, between 3 and 5 days, which was, looking back, the most amazing experience. From sleeping on the floor in like a college dorm room to being picked up in the limo of a guy in Savannah, Georgia, who owned like a, BMW dealership or something, and just feeling like a king, right? Playing for the Crown Prince of the Netherlands, playing at Disney World and Disneyland and Epcot Center and all kinds of stuff. And then at the end of the tour, nothing was moving forward as far as Berklee, and they offered me to come back as a music director. So I ended up working for them for 1 more year. And the end of that year in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, I stayed with the family and we talked about the plans for the future. I told them about my dreams of going to Berklee, which were by now dying. Also, Yugoslavia, this is now 1989, and things are not looking good in Yugoslavia, right? It's looking like civil war and bad things are about to happen. Their names were Gene and Harris Leiden. After the show, which went really well, Jean pulls me aside and she said, listen, my husband and I were thinking of you and your dreams of going to Berklee. I used to live in Berklee. I know Director of Admissions, Stephen Lipman from Berklee College of Music. He happens to be in Florida next week to do interviews. I called him up and set up an interview for you. We're going to drive you down there so you can have an interview. They arranged with the cast to get a replacement for me for the show. We went down there. I had an interview. I got accepted. I got a half scholarship. And then Jean and her husband and my host family from Colorado Springs, Wes and Chris Hill, they chipped in for the first year to cover the expenses. And they hooked me up with a place to live with a friend of theirs in Wellesley Hills.
Damir, you've had a lot of angels in your life.
I did.
People who, from the moment somebody picks you out to say you're going, it changed your trajectory.
It was absolutely, and I'm so grateful, and I'm, again, still very much in touch with them. Wes, my host father from Colorado Springs, unfortunately was killed in a car accident some years ago. But I'm still in touch with Chris and with Jean. And with Berklee, the interns that I have, I try to give back now to people who have dreams, and a lot of the interns are from other countries. I mean, I don't really care where they're from as long as I can feel the passion and interest in doing what they want to be doing. I spend a decent amount of time these days trying to give back as a thank you for the people who helped me out, kind of paying forward.
So, going to go back to Bosnia
Okay.
for this question. You were born in Tuzla. I imagine not a lot of people listening know about Tuzla. It means salt pan in Turkish, which I didn't know. And then I also looked up a tourism blog, and it says it's called The City on a Grain of Salt. So since you grew up there, I was wondering if you could just tell us what's special about Tuzla.
Former Yugoslavia, huge parts of it are based on the kind of the land of the former Panonic Lake, which was this giant lake that covered part of Europe during prehistoric times. So a lot of it is flat and very fertile. So you come down, my former wife is from Germany, so we would be in Germany, we would cross the Alps, and then you would slowly arrive back down to Slovenia and Croatia and drive through these just flat lands with lots of fields and kind of like the Midwest here, right? And then you make a turn to enter Bosnia and hell breaks loose. It's hilly, it's bumpy, it's foresty, it's wild, it's crazy. And then what would take here maybe 50 minutes after a 2-hour drive, you get to this decently sized city of Tuzla into these hills and mountains over there. And the big things about Tuzla are it's an industrial city. Coal and salt are the big reasons it exists. There are big coal mines, and salt mine is kind of the unusual part in this part of the world. Probably leftovers of the salt from the Panonic Lake. And they've actually, I'm super proud of them because when I was growing up, a portion of the city was kind of like a swamp. It was interesting for kids, but it smelled and, you couldn't even go there. It was like quicksand. You couldn't go there. We watched this building that would slowly sink. I moved out. I was here in the States. And then last time which is now some years ago because I go every year, but the first time I went back, I watched what they did. And I don't know how and what they did, but they rearranged the whole thing and turned it into these lakes, these salt lakes that are in the middle of the city and are now a tourist attraction for the region. They're beautiful and really well put together. And this dirt and mud and muck were all cleaned up and people are really enjoying themselves. I think the waters have kind of healing qualities to them. So a lot of people come for that. It's just an interesting place. So the salt comes from that. And I think part of the reason why the city was sinking is because they were sucking the salt water to process it and extract the salt crystals that we would use in kitchen and for industrial purposes as well.
What motivated you to become a composer and a producer?
I don't think there was one thing or one motivation. It was just kind of a journey, right? A journey from that age when I was at Berkeley still. It was wanting to be on stage, performing, which I did with a bunch of bands, and I enjoyed that very much. At one point, I don't know, I guess I realized it doesn't look like... And I did study writing for film, right? Watching films and enjoying the music as a kid. It was, for you guys here, I'm sure it was a special thing. For somebody growing up in a very different part of the world where the life here seemed almost unreal in some ways, was an even bigger experience. From Jaws and Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that stuff, it really affected me. And the music, being into music, was just really attractive. And at one point you find yourself, how might I make a living? And this seemed like a reasonable choice. I was just genuinely interested in the marriage of how it all works, the technicalities of it. AI is a big topic these days. At the time when I was getting into music, it was electronic instruments, synthesizers and sequencers and computers and all that stuff. And it was kind of the similar dilemma. Oh my God, are the computers going to take all the work from the creatives, from the musicians, from the composers, from the studios, from all these things? It all ended up settling itself, interestingly enough, and everybody's still working, but we're still facing a new challenge and new dilemmas. It just kind of worked over time. There was no okay, I am a composer. It was just like you were moving step by step and ended up going into that direction. For a few years, actually, after I moved here, I kind of had day jobs. I worked on a TV show for a while in the music department. I worked in a post-production house that did commercials. And then I worked for a record label, for Jive Records. You know, Britney Spears and Linkin Park were like roaming around the hallways over on Sunset Boulevard. I had an office there. I was like Mr. Hotshot, you know, getting swag from management companies and all these things, going to concerts and feeling on top of the world. And then at one point going, hey, I tapped myself on the shoulder for that, because at some point I realized it's not me that they were appreciating, it was the company. And I wanted to see what can I do and what is just me, right? And I quit. And this is just around September 11th. The company actually ended up being sold, and most people ended up without work or going to a different company. And I struggled for a year, and then things worked out that I could start doing this on my own, actually with a partner in redCola.
Did your experience as a musician shape your approach to producing music and designing sounds?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you know, you live and breathe it. I watch my son now, who's into photography, and he lives and breathes it. And it's just every single thing, every sound you hear, you think about it, you experience it, you analyze it, you think, what can you do with it? From writing songs, how you write songs, different styles, different ways, different approaches, different everything. At that time, you know, I was still into electronic music, film music, obviously. I was kind of getting back to the classical area of music that I started with when I was a kid, which just went over my head when I was a kid. Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, you know, all these guys. Seeing people's faces in the audience as you perform music, that also makes you think. It's an incredible bellwether for how you're doing and what you are doing, seeing whether people are interested or are zoning out, which can be painful if somebody's zoning out and you're out there, you know, you worked, you practiced, you did things, you're passionate about something, and then you just see it not reaching them the way you were hoping it would. It makes an impact. And the other way around, seeing people just having fun and jumping up and down and getting crazy and enjoying themselves. It's a powerful experience. All of that combined, I think, turned into a recipe for making choices, small little choices that add up over time.
You mentioned redCola, so let's talk about it. How did you meet your partner and get started with the business?
So I quit the day job at Zamba, at this, you know, big record label, hoping and trying to survive on my own, writing just the music. And I was struggling. It was doable, but I was struggling. My girlfriend at the time, which ended up being my wife, which is now my former wife, was supportive of that as well. And she had a good job, but it was a struggle. And then through a music supervisor acquaintance who was at MTV that I worked with, he one day reached out to me and said, hey, you want to meet a friend of mine? He's looking for somebody to do music with. His name is Jonathan Paul. And over on Hollywood Boulevard on Wilton and Hollywood, Jonathan, he was basically at the time working as a art director for magazines and fashion labels. And it was just looking to expand his creative things and wanted to do electronic music. And we had a conversation. It wasn't one of these love at first sight type things like, oh my God, let's work together. He told me what he was doing. I told him about what I was doing. He gave me some stuff that he was starting to work on and said, hey, see if you can do something with this. And I played around with it over the weekend, playing back on like Monday, and he liked it very much. Next thing you know is like, hey, why don't you come and move to my space with your music? I did not know, but he had agents for doing music for commercials. And that agent, Sarah Gavigan, was representing people like Moby and Thievery Corporation and the original members of Black Eyed Peas. So it was really good company, right? And Jonathan is a badass in so many ways, an inspiration and such a creative person, and somebody I've learned so much over time, even though we've spent 50% of the time arguing and just fighting over things and choices and all this kind of stuff. But one of the dearest people in my life so far, in my career, somebody I've learned from so much. We ended up doing commercials for many years, which ended up, after initial struggle, going really well, doing, top of the line commercials from Nike to McDonald's and Burger King and Land Rover and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And then the same person that introduced us asked if we would help out on something called sound design for a movie trailer. He was working for a trailer house. We were both clueless about any of this. I mean, I would watch movies, but you never think about how that stuff is put together. Never thought about it. It was the, I think, second or third installment of Live Free or Die Hard movies. It was called Live Free, Die Hard. And we needed to create, I think these like Russian hackers are hacking the electric grid of New York City, and the Fox fanfare opens up the trailer, and we had to come up with all these sounds of the stuff coming up. Didn't know what we were doing, just faked it, but they liked it, and it paid pretty well, and they called us again to help out with more of that stuff, and we ended up for a while doing commercials and movie trailers. And then slowly, the trailers were just kind of picking up, and we were doing more and more of that kind of stuff. And this whole sound design thing, which I was completely unaware of, ended up becoming really interesting and kind of innovative way to make music. And a combination of, I guess, all the skills and education I've had up to that point, because on top of learning about music, I learned about electronic music and programming synthesizers and things like that, right? And for sound design, computer is kind of an integral part of that. Ended up just working out well for us. And we were doing that for a while. So, we were one of the first people working in the sound design field. I can't claim, it's not something we were planning on doing, we just ended up doing it. This guy, Gertu Serios from the trailer house that we were working with, he's an incredibly talented trailer producer and owner and editor and all that stuff. And it was him who was kind of pushing this idea of sound design forward. We just kind of followed along. And these days, it's a common term, and trailer music is a legitimate profession for many people creating it. We just happened to be kind of fall into it when we were starting out and stuck with it and still enjoy it. I love it.
So you've had the fortune to collaborate with some renowned artists and musicians. So how did those experiences influence you and your work?
Greatness rubs off, all right? When you are fortunate enough to just be around creative people and great people, and not just creative people, but just people who think, people with ideas, people who stand for something. It makes you think, it makes you question and evaluate the way you do things. It inspires you to try to do as well as the people that you are inspired by, that you encounter. All of that, just the creative process, working with these people, you see how they do things and you go, "Ooh, that's kind of cool. Let me try that next time I have to do something creative." It's also comforting in many ways, because many times you are just one of many in the room banging their heads against the wall, trying to come up with the idea and solve a problem and move things forward. And that's good to know. It's good to know that it's a struggle. Creative process is in some ways a struggle. Doesn't have to be a torturous struggle, but it is if you're doing it right and if you're doing it in a creative way, it should be a struggle. The moment you are coasting and doing things in a predictable way, expecting predictable results, you're not doing it right. You always want to remind yourself to push yourself forward, to turn things upside down, do it in a way that you haven't done it before, which is inspiring and frightening. These days, we have about 120 composers around the world that we work with. And one of the first things I tell them, I encourage them to make mistakes. I encourage them to experiment and do things that they haven't done before.
How do you get musicians to work with you, or do you recruit, or would they get in touch with you? How do you find your musicians that you work with?
To this day, not once did we ask somebody to come and write for us. They come to us. I still wonder in awe how this works and why, how they find us, any of that stuff. Especially these days, especially I think after pandemic, I gave up social media for myself personally and for the company. So we don't advertise, we don't promote, we don't do any of that stuff. They hear about what we are doing somewhere on the internet. Some years ago, we worked with a great company out of UK called Spitfire Audio that I'm a huge fan of. We ended up releasing with them kind of this virtual instrument, which was based on many years of Jonathan and mine work in movie trailers, the sound design stuff. They are really good at marketing. I think at least part of the way that people are learning about redCola was through them. I give them all the credit. I asked myself, I kind of fell into that trap when I was younger, the whole marketing thing. But I don't want to market. I want to make music. I want to help other people make music. That's my choice. So it was a choice. I didn't know how, but it's still coming, and it's a great pleasure and privilege working with many of them. Not necessarily everybody, but with many of them. These days, it's just amazing. There's a guy in Japan that I've been working with for 4 or 5 years now. He has several albums with us, and he does not speak English, I think, pretty much at all, right? So I get this letter in Japanese that I feed through, used to be translation apps, now through ChatGPT and that kind of stuff, and can perfectly understand what he's saying. And I translate my letter back to Japanese and send it to him. It's just exciting to be able to communicate with people.
That's amazing, because we talked a little bit earlier about how technology is influencing the creative process. AI is now in the forefront of that, right? But with technology, you can work with musicians around the world and translate their work and communicate with them. So that's an interesting way of how we're working with these tools.
Yes. Yeah. This is all before AI. I mean, AI is to me at least, it's a relatively recent thing. And there were all kinds of other things and ways of solving these things, from email and, cloud services where you can put a project you're working on. They can place a MP3 of something they're working on that I can listen to, make comments, and email them back and go back and forth that way. The one thing with that is, this was before pandemic. At one point I realized we are working with so many of these people. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they sound like. I didn't know anything about them except their names and their email addresses. So I decided to invite some of them to come here to Los Angeles. And we booked a couple of houses in Joshua Tree, this beautiful desert, about 3-hour drive outside of here. And we lived there for a week, 10 days. Talked music, made music, hiked, dined, jogged together. And that was an incredible experience. Based on the success of that, I ended up inviting 10 composers to this beautiful city in Italy, southern Italy, called Matera. And we recorded in a theater built inside a cave.
Wow.
We lived on this villa outside of the city with a man who is still a dear friend. And that was just one of the most incredible experiences. We had a composer from Moscow, from Russia, from Italy, from Germany, England, Denmark, the States, from all over the place. I wasn't planning. I ended up starting a whole different company. We talked about sound design earlier. And after years of doing that, and I guess as I'm growing and maturing, my draw to the world of traditional orchestral instruments and traditional sort of classical, not traditional, but modern classical music was becoming stronger. So I started a whole other company based on that experience and that material called Short Story Collective, which creates these short stories, all short musical stories created with traditional musical instruments, with violins, with orchestras, with violas and cellos, anything orchestral, which has been a lot of fun. Kind of a complete opposite of the sound design world.
Can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts on AI in music creation and what effects do you think it would have on the music industry? Do you believe AI can truly replicate the creativity and intuition of human composers and musicians?
It's a loaded topic. in so many ways. I find AI and the promise of it super exciting, in some ways inspiring, and at the same time, absolutely frightening and terrifying and foreboding and devastating, if that makes any sense. You know, we put out these albums. We have, I don't know, probably close to 100 albums out there in circulation for the movie trailers and all kinds of other stuff that we do. And we used to hire a gentleman in Scotland who would do album covers for that, right? I don't know, being excited about the promise of this stuff and learning about things like Midjourney when AI just first popped out, I delved into it myself to see if I could come up with some of this stuff. And I could. And it's exciting. And instead of paying whatever we were paying Sam to do this in England, I could do it for $15 a month, right? It's incredible. I wrote him a long letter about my internal struggle of this thing taking his job and money away from him. And I do hope, and I think I will go back with him and see if we can find ways of continuing our collaboration, because it's more fun interacting with another human being. At that time, AI and music was just crap. I could anticipate that it's going to turn that way, but at that time, nothing close to anything that would be like what we can come up with. Cut to about a month and a half ago, companies like Suno AI and Stable Audio 2 or 3, and this company called Udio out of Boston came up with their latest iterations of AI, and I was floored. I literally could not sleep at night. It really felt like, all right, what do I do with myself and what do I do with my life? The quality was next level. And again, this is just the beginnings of it. Where it's going to go, and it's a unavoidable topic with any musician, creator, composer, performer, I know. It's going to be a matter of adjusting to it, learning how to use it to our advantage, right? After many sleepless nights, I decided that one thing about all of these three companies, that it's been basically proven that they were using materials available online without authorization. So I think they are anticipating being sued, and we'll see where all that is going to lead. My decision, at least for the time, was to use the catalog that we own or that we represent, which is about 15,000 copyrights in music and sound design and all these things, and creating our own AI and finding ways of just augmenting the catalog that we have, right? Where that's going to go, we're working on that actively. It's ethical. At this point, it's just going to be material that I have created and that Jonathan has created. We're not involving the material from other composers, which we will need to discuss with everybody and find a way to make it plausible for everybody. As far as, is it going to replace what we do? For some things, yes, absolutely. From your TikTok things and social media things and YouTube things where music is not a kind of integral part of things, or originality is not the most important element of it, I don't see why it couldn't and why it wouldn't, especially for some time, because everybody's just excited about the fact that you can type in some words and you get the music right back, right? I've been working with a French singer for months on an album for our French colleagues in Paris. That's a lot of work. When this stuff came out, just as a test, I went to ChatGPT. It helped me create lyrics. I had it translated to French. I typed those lyrics into these AI music things, and bam, out came, in 30 seconds, came music sang in French with a female vocal that didn't sound robotic in any way. It's just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. It was really good, right? Mixed and mastered and all that stuff in 30 seconds. Mind-blowing.
It scares me, the quickness of it. It feels wrong somehow.
It is wrong. It's not somehow. It is wrong. It is, yeah, because it's analytical. It's, at least at this point, it's non-innovative. But it's just the beginning. Where this is going to go down the line is yet to be seen.
Yeah.
Everybody's hoping, again, going back to what we talked about when I was getting into my career, right? People were concerned that computers will replace studios, which in some ways they have. There's much fewer studios these days, recording studios, than there used to be, you know? As far as orchestras, I mean, on the computer that we're speaking with, I have about probably 20 symphonic orchestra virtual instrument libraries that I can create music on. And I do. And those results are pretty good or great. I still flew to south of Italy to record with live musicians. And I still talk about that often with so many people because it was the experience. And it was the imperfections and the interpretations of these live people, human beings, right, that made it so special. It was not perfect because we had the perfect versions of these things made with the virtual instruments before we even went there. I could have saved myself the cost and the trouble of going and paying for everything and spending time in Italy, right? But living with these guys, getting to know them in person, having the experiences of our host making this beautiful dinners for us outside, hearing the language, enjoying the food, meeting the musicians, learning about them. Oh, I'm still in touch with some of them. It's a connection. It's a beautiful human thing beyond the work stuff. And there's many studios to this day that are doing so well. They have adapted. People still pay money to go record with live musicians in real places. It's incredible.
Would you go to a concert that was all AI?
At this point, right now, I don't think I would. Ask me 10 years from now. It's going to be a whole different thing. You know, I tried Vision Pro from Apple a little while ago. I was considering buying it. I'm going to wait. But that thing is transcendental in some ways. It literally can transport you to places. So you wouldn't be going to a concert. You would be experiencing a concert in your room, wherever you're sitting. It's going to be an experience. Would I pay for it in those kind of terms? Possibly, yes. Would I still want to go to a real concert and get pushed and shoved and be stepped on and, you know, spilled beer, you know, whatever, and, you know, anticipate a possibility of randomly meeting a person that I wouldn't normally meet because they come to appreciate somebody whose work we appreciate together, right? And having a conversation and potentially establishing a friendship. You know, I would want that. So it might go both ways. It used to be we would go to movie theaters. People still do, but not as often as we used to because you have one in your home. Things are changing. The experience is changing, right? The medium is still there. It is evolving as well. I don't have a formed answer for any of these things. I'm kind of questioning myself as I speak.
We'll see. Maybe we'll have a talk in a couple of years and see where you are then.
Absolutely. I am not claiming in any way that I know anything about any of this stuff. Again, it petrifies me. I like going to a theater. I like going to a concert, right? Am I willing to at least explore the idea and the possibility of a different kind of experience that in some ways can be, you know, I'm working with a visual artist out of England who's based here in LA, David Van Aysen. It's the second thing we've done together. He's making virtual sculptures and it's really moving and it's incredible because it doesn't exist in our physical world, right? But using augmented reality in my phone or my iPad, I can view it in my backyard here because you need a huge space. It's going to be exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Art of London. It's stunning. It's such a great idea. He froze a moment of two cars crashing and the driver is falling out of the car. And as they fall out, they're embracing. And it's really moving and beautiful, you know, and there's music, which I did for that. And it's an experience you can't, I don't know if you could have that in the real world, right? I do want to keep things open for these new things. In addition, without hopefully canceling the stuff that we already have.
There's more questions we'd love to ask you, but we're at the bottom of the episode. So I want to pivot to our speed round. We're going to ask you 3 questions. And then we have our question down the lane segment. And that is where we ask our guest to provide a question for our next guest. What movie do you think has the best soundtrack?
No movie has the best soundtrack.
How about your favorite?
It changes over time, even that, right? Right now, my favorite soundtrack is from a TV series I just watched on Netflix last week, Ripley. I absolutely love the show and the soundtrack. I'm listening to the soundtrack all the time. Dune, I love Hans Zimmer in so many ways because he always pushes the envelope. He never delivers what he has done before as much as he can be in charge of that. He always experiments and pushes the envelope. And with what he and Denis Villeneuve, who is one of my favorite directors at the moment, along with Chris Nolan, they're just badasses in this world. I really liked Poor Things, and that was my choice for the Oscars, as unlistenable as it is in some ways as a piece of music, but in the context of a film, which was brilliant to me. And it was just, again, it was experimenting. It was pushing things forward, right? In the simplest of ways, which I'm a big fan of these days. The simplest of ways, and they delivered something that was fresh and different. And it's been in front of us for hundreds and thousands of years. It's just nobody made the choices that the composer made to put things together in that way.
What song brings back childhood memories?
As I was setting up the tech for our conversation here yesterday, and I host these concerts in my house. I had a concert last Thursday. This beautiful, super talented Russian pianist, Grisha Kirchenia, performed, and there was about 30 of us enjoying his music. And one of the gentlemen in the audience came and talked to me afterwards, and he was telling me how he was in the Balkans and in former Yugoslavia, and he mentioned some of the people that he worked with and traveled with. And he mentioned this one lady, Roma, gypsy. And I was curious, and he apparently traveled with her, and I put her name into Spotify or YouTube to see some of her work. 40 seconds later, I was crying like a baby, like a child, hearing the song of a music that a lot of it I don't like. But this lady's music just connected me to the deepest parts of my childhood, and it was so beautiful. And then hearing her story was so moving. She and her husband fostered 47 children, Roma kids that were without home and no future. And she was such a badass. I was actually thinking, I don't know how to make movies, but what a movie this would be. She's like a Edith Piaf of that part of the world. So inspiring. She just passed away in 2016. But what a story. Doing what she was doing as a female in that part of the world and being confident. And it was not without challenges, far from that. And surviving and thriving and creating all these things is so inspiring and so humbling in so many ways. That was yesterday, but it can change in so many different ways. Some of the music from that part of the world when I was a kid, a lot of music from when I was in high school, from U2 to Depeche Mode to Nine Inch Nails to any of that stuff.
You've traveled a lot. What country has impacted you the most?
It's like asking what's your favorite movie. Different places in different ways. I'm going back to Argentina next Friday. My son is down there, and I'm going to visit some of my friends down there. It's interesting because he is able to pick up on this stuff as well because I've been talking about it. And now that he's down there, he understands. He's like, Papa, this is such a place for you. So Argentina is very dear to my heart from what I've experienced so far. It's not even Argentina. It's just the city of Buenos Aires because that's the only place that I've seen. It was actually only one part of it, Palermo, Soho, that I stayed in. But I had so many adventures and so many incredible musical experiences down there. I ended up in an underground tango club that a friend of mine runs at 2 a.m. in the morning, walking in a giant empty space like in a Wes Anderson movie, talking to the guard that doesn't speak English, that I thought was just going to turn me back at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And he ended up leading me 3 floors underground to this place filled with music, this 1940s tango. Lionel, the guy who runs it, pointed out a gentleman. He was 95 at the time. This is just before pandemic, 2020. He is a legend of the tango world, and he makes himself available between 2 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. twice a week. And women fly from around the world to have one dance with him. I find it beautiful and inspiring and so telling. And you don't hear about this, it's not on TV. So that kind of stuff. It's incredible.
Well, now you've just made my decision on the next country.
Oh, highly recommend it.
Our question down the lane, as I said, this is provided from our last guest for you. And their question to you is, if you had the power to change one decision, I know it's going to be hard, one decision that you made in early life between the ages of, let's say, 18 to 25, what would you change?
If I had the power, that would be not to chase the money. For one reason or another, you had to survive. I had to survive, and I ended up chasing money, doing things with money as one of the considerations, which ended up shaping the rest of my life and my career in many ways. And now I'm 57, looking back and comparing to other people who probably made that decision in a better way. I wish I did not chase the money.
That's a great way to end our conversation. Damir, as always, it's great to chat with you. We can't wait to have you back on.
My pleasure, and I'll be happy to.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share Podcetera. And be sure to follow and like the series wherever you enjoy podcasts.
For Podcetera, I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.